Hey everyone, Timmy Chuck here, and in this video I'm going to cover off something known as the productivity funnel, which is a system for becoming hyper productive when it comes to managing your day-to-day tasks, working effectively as a team. And we are going to go through what you can see here is a Trello board. We're looking at something called Trello, and over the years with my teams, I've used all of the different software you could imagine. And we stuck with this one just because it's simple, it's intuitive. We used to way back when use post-it notes, and we used an agile method for managing our work. And this really is the closest thing that we could find that reflected the previous process. For example, these things look like post-it notes, right? These cards, these things called cards, and these things look like lists, right? So we have lists, we have cards on our board here. And within the cards, they're a little bit more sophisticated than a post-it note. You can assign owners through members here. You can create labels, checklists, due dates. You can attach files and do some other funky stuff here. But these are cards and these are lists. And what I'm going to teach you is something called a productivity funnel. And let's talk about that here first. So what is a productivity funnel? Well, if you turn a funnel to the left here sideways, you can see that any one person in a given day, there's a bunch of stuff on your to-do list, right? But there are only 24 hours in a day. We have limited capacity to the extent that we're doing it all ourselves. And the only way that we can really expand our capacity is by, automating things, by delegating, handing things off, and working with team members. But we do have a finite capacity, and so we create this productivity funnel by following a set of rules, which is going to make sure that the right stuff gets through first in priority, rather than this thing getting completely full of a mix of things that we should be doing, as well as a lot of things, because we're habit forming creatures, right? A lot of things that we should not be doing, and the things that we might choose because we like to do them, but they're not really adding to our momentum moving us forward. So we have two people here. We have current you and we have future you. And think about the tasks that you work on in a given day for present you as being future gifts for future you. So you're planting these seeds by working on the right things, which are going to, in theory, if you work on the right things today, then you're really giving future you the gift of momentum. So we want to use the rules that I'm going to go through on this board to our advantage to create future gifts for ourselves in the coming days and weeks. And so how do we do that? Well, I'm going to go through a set of rules here. And again, on this board, let's just go left to right. You're going to see in the middle a left arrow and a right arrow. On the right-hand side of this board are some reference material that we can use to create recurring tasks and reminders. And I'm not going to get a lot into that here today. What I really want to focus on is these lists here, how they work, and the rules that if we know them, if we follow them, they are universal, timeless principles. And you can apply these rules, by the way, to any tool. Trello is like a hammer, it's just a tool, right? So if you know these principles, if you apply these principles in any situation, you're going to be ahead of the game. And if I could provide a bit of context, I stumbled upon these principles a few years back trying to manage our team of over 50 people in our organization. And I was banging my head against the wall because I tried all the different tools, and I started blaming the tools and or myself for why things just weren't working, and all of our team members just seemed to be on a different page and things weren't moving forward. So I turned my attention away from the tools and the software and the shiny objects towards how do effective hyper productive teams work. And it led me to a few studies, this being one of the primary ones, called the New Product Development Game. So it's a white paper study looking at the most productive teams across the world. And they noticed a pattern, essentially. And the traditional method of, if you look at like Gantt charts, where you plan using milestones, they weren't quite as effective or productive as these team members that were using and planning the work a little bit differently. And this is what we're going to be talking about here, where we can eliminate dependencies and kind of compress work and work on the right things at the right time, and acknowledge that we live in a dynamic, fast-paced, changing environment where priorities change, dependencies change, and we have to acknowledge that and adapt. And so that's why it's called agile, which is one of the methodologies I'm going to be teaching you. as well as a few others. But this is kind of the root of where it comes from. So long story short, when we understood and studied the patterns and applied the patterns and the tools being secondary, this is where we noticed some really, really cool things starting to happen. So that's some history. Now let's go through, you can see some lists here, and I want to talk about each of these and add a little bit of definition to them as well. So backlog not ready. Think of this as a conveyor belt going left to right, right? A conveyor belt where you're kind of manufacturing ideas, right? You're turning ideas into reality. So that said, if you look at backlog not ready, ideas start and they're often not fully formed, and we're not sure, do I want to work on this? Is it important? Is it not important? This is your think of it as your sandbox where you're going to be putting things that aren't yet fully formed. And it's okay, you don't need to feel guilty if you don't do any work on them. Now, when you move them to ready, that means that you're clear on what needs to be done, who's doing it, and that you're committed to getting it done. You haven't established when you're going to get it done. You've committed that you want to get it done. You're clear on what it is and who's going to do it. That's backlog ready. This week, what we want to do is pull work in. So rather than pushing a mile-long to-do list on your plate, we want to pull work in as you have capacity. And we're going to talk about why that is. But this week is when you are ready to work on it and you have realistic capacity to get it done this week by Friday. Today, so the list today here is to visually identify your top priorities for the day, what you specifically want to accomplish and get done today. Doing is your work in process, so you're actually moving it forward, and that task is in motion. And then stuck, if you are working on something and it's out of your control, you're stuck, you're waiting for something for whatever reason, move it out of the way so you can visually see that it's stuck and it's not sitting in your doing list because you're not moving forward. It's stuck. It's come to a grinding halt. So move it to that list for those types of tasks. Now, I want to go through the rules for hyper productivity, and we're going to go through these one by one. And again, these are universal timeless principles that if you know them and understand them and apply them and build your habits around them, you're just going to be much, much more effective as a leader when it comes to delegating and when it comes to managing your own time. So starting with, and we've talked about this already, breaking work down by working in 1 week sprints. So this means biting the elephant one bite at a time. And if there's a task that's a big Goliath, an elephant, and you bring it onto this board, oftentimes it's paralysis by analysis. We don't know where to start. It seems very daunting and overwhelming. And it's almost like that term paper in university that you're just staring at and you're not taking action. So that's why we want to have a bias towards action by breaking work down into 1 week sprints. So when you pull things from backlog ready into this week, it's going to, and we add some automations oftentimes that will automatically give a due date of Friday when you pull it into this week to reinforce that. And it's the rule. Of course, there are some exceptions, but we want to stick with this rule of thumb to really have a bias towards action by breaking work down into 1 week sprints. Number two, use constraints to minimize your work in process, which I call half-built bridges. Now most people, how they work is they've got their to-do lists, and what it looks like is they've got like 100 things in doing, and that's not reality. And the half-built bridge analogy is, if a bridge is 90% complete, it's not done. It's just sitting there. The cars cannot cross it until it's 100% done. And if we're trying to build 50 bridges at once, we're just going to be spread a mile wide, going an inch deep. So the trick to productivity really is minimizing your work in process, breaking work down, and moving things to done. And when you do that, you're not pushing work on yourself, which feels overwhelming. If you think about, when you move into a new house and you've got a garage filled with boxes everywhere, you don't know where to start, right? You're just like overwhelmed and you start chipping away at all the different boxes. You're not going to get a lot done. If you pull one of those boxes and prioritize it, so for example, if you're moving, typically we start with the kitchen or the bedroom, right? And so we start with the kitchen, we identify those boxes, pull those out of the garage and move them into the kitchen and complete those boxes, unpack them before moving forward, right? That's what we're doing here. We're pulling work by priority. So minimizing your work in process and creating constraints where there's some rules of thumb where in today, I recommend, we have the 3x3 strategy, which is 3 for the week, 3 for the day. So Each night I will make sure there's 3 cards here, and that's like if I got nothing else done. Yes, I want to get all this stuff done, but if I got nothing else, what would those 3 be? And that's what we put in here. And doing as well, we want to minimize our work in process right here, right? And if we can't take action, get them out of the way, move them to stuck, right? So that you've got eyeballs on them, you're aware that things are stuck, and you can't move forward. This week as well, I like to use a constraint. Usually I'll aim for 5 to 8 cards here. And that's going to, again, you're making some very clear decisions on, if I had to pick out of these 20 things, 5 to 8 for this week, what would they be? And we pull them in here. And so it starts to look like a funnel. If you can imagine, you've got a lot of cards here, and you got 3 here, max, and you're working on 1 or 2 things at a time. It's going to start to look like a funnel here, right? You can see we automated the due on Friday here. So that's what we mean by a sideways funnel. And by the way, when we work in this way and when we use these constraints, there's a funny thing that also happens. When you're forced to limit the things that you work on, the only way that you can improve your output is by improving the quality of those things that you work on. So you should be selecting the things that are the most important, the biggest bang for your buck. And we're creating a situation which I like to call asymmetric ROI, asymmetric return on your investment, which, your investment in terms of your time currency and your money currency. But we want to have, relative to the input, a high output, right? So you put this amount of effort in, you get this amount of result, right? And a lot of people, when they're, spread a mile wide, or they're working on the wrong things, and we're setting up essentially a return on investment where it looks like you're putting in a lot of effort and getting not a lot in return, right? And so we talked about, remember, with this funnel here, how do we increase our capacity? Well, we can delegate and automate as well, right? So these are ways that you can get this type of stuff, $10 per hour activities off your plate by delegating. If you're stuck with a technology situation, I like to focus on finding the who rather than the how. Good example is I ran into an issue just last week, actually, where one of my websites went down, and it was early in the morning, and none of my team was awake yet to help me. And it was a bit of a pain in the butt. I didn't know how to get it set up again. So rather than me trying to go through documents and school myself on web hosting, I went to a site called Fiverr. I went here, and I typed in, I searched for somebody who could help with IT, essentially. I found someone, we hopped on a quick video call. In less than 2 minutes, I shared my screen, he walked me through it, we fixed it. It cost me $20. Okay, so I could have spent hours and hours being stuck, but I focused on the who, and I got that thing dealt with really, really, really quickly. So asymmetric ROI. So working in 1 week sprints, we talked about that. Using constraints, half-built bridges, we talked about that. Now, giving your tasks titles so clear that anyone reading could understand its objective. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you're working on a task and it says meet with team, it's not very clear which team, what are you meeting about? And a trick that I like to often use to add a little bit of color to the card so that anybody reading it can understand what is it about, and what does done look like? What's the objective of the card? Meaning that how can we get that card across the bridge? You should be able to understand that by just reading the title of the card. So I would add a little bit of color. So sales team, and then whenever you're stuck on this, add the 2 words so that. When you put in so that, it forces you to add a little bit of purpose and description to it. Meet with the sales team so that we can decide on our team KPIs, right? So we're very clear on, there's a verb, we're meeting with the sales team. If we just put, sales team KPIs, what does that mean? So what do we want to do? We want to meet with the sales team so that, what's the purpose? What's the objective? And you can see that this is what done looks like, right? And if it's just meet with the sales team, what does that mean? What is the definition of done? And then the other piece here, which you'll see further down, is I'll often add in a definition of done so that everybody can look at this list of criteria and be on the same page with what needs to be true in order for this to be done. So those are a couple tricks here. So making the titles as clear as possible so that anybody reading it knows what it's about and the objective of the card to move it to done. And ideally one owner per card. So when we look at a task again, if you add, and by the way, here you can add a member by doing this, or you can open it and add them doing this. There's only one person on the board, but if there were multiple, a lot of people will add multiple people to the card. And this is an easy out for the week to go by and you're meeting and you're wondering what is the status of the card, and you've created a situation where people can say, I thought so-and-so was going to do it. So you should have one quarterback on a card. You might have more than one person working on it, but one owner of that card to make sure it crosses the bridge. So I like to say one set of eyeballs per card as a rule of thumb to eliminate that situation from occurring. Grooming your board at least a few times per week to bring the states back to the current reality. So you're going to notice, like as you set things up, it's kind of like when you organize your garage in the spring. You get everything in place, but then a month goes by and it's chaos again. So we need to maintain it, right? We've built this infrastructure. Now we need to maintain and sustain it. And so to do that, we groom it by, remember we talked about constraints. You can groom it by, if there's like 20 things in this week, move the things that aren't realistic and that you're not going to get them done this week. Move them back to ready. Move them back to this list. And so you groom it to look basically like a funnel again. So you'd be moving the cards here. If you've got a bunch in today, you move them back over here. So you've got 5 to 8, 2 to 3 or 1 to 3, and then 1 to 2 here in doing. And then the things that are stuck, move them here. And that's grooming your board. And then the other thing is you might see tasks on here which are, maybe they're not even relevant anymore. Like it's no longer a priority. Maybe you fixed it already or it's changed. So either get rid of it if it's no longer relevant, or change the title so that it reflects the current reality. You might have written this, 2 weeks ago. Things have changed and you keep looking at it wondering what needs to happen here. So update it to the current reality by changing its title to reflect today. And then use the clarity around the definition of done, which might be the reason people might not know how to move forward, and giving it a clear task using like a trick like so that. And grooming your board a couple times a week. So when you get stuck in manufacturing, I'm going to tell a quick story about something called the andon cord. The andon cord. So in a manufacturing line, when they're building cars, for example, they have a process. Whenever there's a mistake or something goes wrong, they have a cord along the assembly line. It's called the andon cord. And all of the workers are empowered to do it. You can see right here. And when they pull on it, the production line literally stops. And if you can imagine cars, it's like thousands of dollars per minute, probably more than that, depending on the production facility. So pulling it gets the assembly line to stop, and everybody will quickly huddle around to figure out what is wrong so that they can get it fixed and resolved as quickly as possible. So very high stakes situation, as you can imagine. And that's what helps to get it fixed really, really quick. They create that scenario and they triage it and they fix it as quickly as possible. So that is called the andon cord. And when I say in the context of this, when you get stuck, pull the andon cord. If it's out of your hands and you can't fix it, find the who, like the example I gave you where I couldn't fix it. I had to take action immediately and reach out to the person that could help me fix it. So I pulled the andon cord by going to Fiverr, but if you have a supervisor or if you're working with your team, have them let you know that they're stuck, because if you don't see the problem, you can't solve the problem. So we need to make the problem really abundantly clear so that we can attack it and fix it and solve it. Remember, if this is a conveyor belt, when that thing stops, nothing moves forward. So pull the andon cord if you're stuck by finding the who's that can help get you unstuck. So this is a tip for you and for your team whenever things are stuck, right? Think of that conveyor belt coming to a grinding halt. We talked about the definition of done. And then when you're delegating or working with your team, oftentimes they'll get stuck as well because they don't have all the resources. So if there's passwords that need to be shared, like we use LastPass, for example, to share passwords with team members, any other resources that they're going to need, that's why the definition of done is quite helpful, so that we're avoiding the ping pong, the back and forth that will occur when there's follow-up questions. So you want to think through in advance. Oftentimes we'll record videos to make it really, really clear what we want done. And so we record a video to get clarity and eliminate a lot of those questions that we know will come up. So get clear on the resources that are going to be needed if you are delegating a card. And screen recording software like this one is really good for even attaching to a card if you're working in a team or delegating tasks. So that wraps up our productivity funnel training here. If you want a copy of this board, just click on More here and create a copy. So copy the board, change the title for yourself, and feel free to use these lists and follow these rules and these principles.